Welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. It's Thursday, so just a quick note that we have our Thursday night Bulwark Plus exclusive live streams. If you want to see the whole gang get together and talk about the news of the day, Joe Biden will be having his first presser, and we know how that's going to go. I mean, we know what the spin is going to be. I can write the Ben Shapiro tweets before it even takes place. But anyway, that will be tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, 7 o'clock Central Time. I mentioned that because, of course, I am Central Time. Also, a reminder that you can watch that live stream if you sign up for Bulwark Plus. And if you sign up for Bulwark Plus, you'd have access to some of our newsletters, including JVL's Daily Triad, My Morning Shots. And My Morning Shots basically is it's about, I would say it's about 60% serious, 40% heavy snark about guns. And I make the modest proposal because I've become so deeply cynical about whether or not Congress is going to do anything, enact any common sense gun legislation. So my modest proposal is it too much to ask that we stop fetishizing guns, that maybe politicians should find a different phallic substitute for the moment? Maybe Ted Cruz should have a moratorium on the use of the AR-15 machine gun or machine guns as cod pieces. Ted Cruz famously wanted to show that he was like one of the guys by cooking bacon on a machine gun because that was so smart. And of course, we know that Don Jr. has taken to posing with guns behind him. And it's not just a guy thing. I get that. I understand. I mean, you have the Lauren Boeberts and the Marjorie Taylor Greens, but this whole I'm going to show you my really big gun and the cosplay and the dressing up. Perhaps just as a modest suggestion, this is not really advancing Second Amendment rights or respect for responsible gun ownership. If you want to be taken seriously, maybe ought not to act like a bunch of fucking idiots. So we got the explicit rating before I even introduced Tom Nichols, who comes back to the podcast. And welcome back, Tom.
Hey, Charlie. Great to be back.
Well, let's see how you feel at the end of this, because we've been having a little bit of discussion on the Bulwark staff between the dog owners on the Bulwark staff and the cat fanciers. Yeah. Now, it's one thing for us to go back and forth, but you have parachuted into our fight. It was like those guys are fighting over there, and you parachute in, and amazingly, as an advocate for cats. And very specifically, I want to address this. The comment that I made, who did I actually say this to? I was on one of the podcasts, and we were talking about the difference between dogs and cats and the obvious inherent superiority of dogs. Okay.
There it is.
No. I need to back up a little bit. See, I didn't start this. This came out of nowhere. This came out of JVL and Sarah Longwell just totally gratuitously said they don't like dog people. And Sarah thought that she was really annoyed by dog people who tried to, get this, humanize themselves by posting pictures of dogs. To which my response was, well, maybe they were humanizing themselves because they're actually humans. So this guilty to humanize, but of course it immediately degenerated into dogs versus cats, and I did point out that one of the advantages of dogs is that dogs are the ones who they serve in the military, they arrest people, they're canine units for police departments. Dogs jump out of planes, they sniff for bombs, and I did say there are no hero cats. And boy, did I open up a can of whoop ass on myself, because apparently
you opened up a giant can of little Friskies all over yourself there. Exactly.
Well, I understand that there's this need for the urban legend about the hero cat, because there's a video out there. There's one YouTube video of a cat that actually does something. And it's like, see, cats are okay. So, out of the 100 million cats in the world, how many cats are there? A billion cats in the world, most of whom are basically saying "fuck your feelings" all the time. There's one cat that jumps out of the.
Think they're saying, Charlie. That's dog people are so insecure about cats. I don't want to draw too close a comparison to MAGA world, but they're always thinking about what cat people think about them. And the thing is, cats and cat people, we're not thinking about you at all. That's the thing. Cats just are.
See? That's what I'm
They
saying.
keep their thoughts to themselves. They
Yeah,
are not judging you, Charlie.
that's right. They're just over there. I mean, and then there's a reason why. For example, Dr. Evil is portrayed not as a dog person. Dr. Evil has a cat, right? I mean, you think that's a coincidence?
Well,
I mean,
but
what is it?
the cat owners tend to correlate with high intelligence, so it's
Okay, but I get to give you the shot here because you are one of these people who believe that there are hero cats. And by the way,
I have one.
I have owned up to it that there are hero cats. Okay, and you actually have a story about a hero cat.
And I'll stipulate, dogs are great working animals. I mean, cats are working animals if you put them in a barn and tell them to keep the mice out of the grain. My cat is a great mouser. But no, my cat woke me up. I had a house fire 3 years ago. And the cat uncharacteristically came up at 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:30, and started walking on our faces. And we thought, geez, that's unusual, because usually cats do that, wake up, feed me kind of stuff. And no matter what we did, we threw her off the bed. Finally my wife got up and said, all right, fine. Went downstairs and said, I smell smoke. And, the cat boxes and her kind of hangout place are down in the cellar. And I said, oh, maybe there's something in the cellar. And there was flame shooting out of the cellar ceiling. And the cat, uncharacteristically, again, cats, they usually come downstairs and they wait for their bowl of food and all that. The cat knew something was up. She stayed right on the bed where we could see her upstairs. I said, get the cat. Cat said, okay, see, I told you something was up. We called 911 and the fire guys said, if you had stayed in bed a little longer, you'd have lost the house. It would have broken through the floor. And so the cat knew something was up and said, come on, get out of bed and I'll wait here for you. Also interesting that cat owners will tell you cats are particularly a problem in fires because they hide.
Right. Yes.
And this cat did not. She stood right out there, said, you're not going to have to look for me. I'm waiting for you. You go fix this. And then my wife and the cat spent the rest of the morning in the car. It was during one of the cold snaps of that winter. And so the cat and my wife sat out in the car with the engine running, staying warm while the firefighters came in and, sprayed everything down.
Well, so I have to concede the point here. I mean, really, this is a heroic cat story.
She was a good girl.
Okay.
So, yeah. She's a good. I grant you that there are cats who are, shall we say, difficult.
Well, but you reject the possibility that there's a fire and your cat figures this is a great opportunity for me to kill them in their sleep by stepping on their faces. Okay, that didn't happen, right?
Everybody's so afraid of cats killing you in your sleep, and I'm sorry, but you don't have a lot of cat murders.
And I'm gonna use the Sidney Powell defense that no reasonable person would think that I was seriously suggesting that Tom Nichols' cat was thinking here's an opportunity to murder them in their sleep. No reasonable person. I am just asking questions. This is my First Amendment right to be able to express this. The Sidney Powell story. I know it's been like we're on day 3 of it, but it feels like. And David French made this point when I had him on the other day. This just has not gotten enough airtime on the conservative media. It hasn't really penetrated that the president's conspiracy theorist in chief is basically admitting it was complete bullshit. And you people didn't actually, you weren't such suckers that you actually believed me. I mean, it is this perfect bow on this. On the big lie, but the reality is lots of people did believe her and they still believe her.
Yeah, that's why it's not getting, I think, David's right. It's not getting enough airtime, but that's why it's not getting enough airtime. Yeah. Because, what are all of our, former friends in the conservative media going to say? That, they're stuck with her. And David laid this out in a nice little, tweet thread the other night where he said, so basically you either have to admit that you were pumping the lie with them or that you were completely hoodwinked and that you're stupid. I mean, so it always comes, as it so often does in Trump world, it comes down to, are you evil or are you stupid?
Yeah.
Because you've
not
got
mutually exclusive. No, not necessarily mutually exclusive. I mean, there's Dan Bongino. I
Okay,
mean,
fair enough. But,
okay. I mean, and
but they
Tucker Carlson's not stupid, but he, so there's a lot
right,
of
and
things.
they and for the rest of them, they had to pick. It's like, did you know she was lying, or are you too stupid to know she was lying and taking you in? And the people, as you say, the people. I mean, this really proves the durability of the mindset
It does.
of the conspiracy theory, seditionist, anti-constitutionalist movement within the GOP. Powell comes right out and says, "This was all bullshit. I was making it up. This is nonsense. No reasonable person could believe it." And they're already all kind of winking at each other, like, "Yeah, but it." But it is true, sorta, right? It's true enough, and I mean, it's pathetic. I mean, it's really sad to watch.
So I want to dive into something in just a moment, something that came out of the Claremont Institute that I wanted to bounce off of you. But before we do that, there's just two stories that I kind of my favorites, my favorite Schadenfreude stories of the day. Number one involving the Cuomo brothers. We're now finding out. I mean, Andrew Cuomo turns out to be even more deplorable than we could have possibly imagined. But now it turns out that he and Chris Cuomo from CNN jumped the line in every conceivable way with the coronavirus, whatever. So that continues to play out. My favorite story, though, and this is probably a little bit obscure for some folks. It's the story about the Kristi Noem, who is the governor of South Dakota, who apparently would not immediately sign this bill that would ban biological males from participating in women's sports. A transgender rights issue that's become a really big issue. And by the way, there's a legitimate debate back and forth between whether guys who identify as women should be able to compete against girls in sports. I'm leaving that aside. So the legislature passes this ban. Kristi Noem, who has become this conservative icon, refuses to sign it. And the right has gone out of its mind. And yesterday, the spokesman for Kristi Noem criticized, and this is her term, conservative cancel culture for this. She said, in the past year, Noem was the only governor in the entire nation to never order a single business or church in her state to close. Great. The left bullied her incessantly, but she didn't cave, spokesman somebody or other said in a statement. But if any number of conservative pundits are to be believed, that same governor who refused to cave is now caving to the NCAA and Amazon on the issue of fairness in women's sports. What? Apparently uninformed cancel culture is fine when the right is eating their own. Mm-hmm. Well, this is an interesting moment. And the reference to Amazon is they're afraid that if she signs this bill, Amazon might not bring a distribution center to South Dakota and the NCAA might challenge them in court and everything. But interesting. Conservative cancel culture, eating their own.
And this is why I actually worry less about things like cancel culture and wokeness than some of our other pals on the right, because, maybe it was years of studying the Soviet Union and its ideological cancel culture, which we called purge trials. But sooner or later, every revolution, whether of the right or the left, eats itself. Because the people who gain power in a revolution or who feel powerful in a revolution eventually start turning on each other. And the accusers, in the end, all you have are the accusers and the accused. And eventually it burns itself out. And you're seeing this. The Kristi Noem story comes right on the heels of the Lexi McCammon story, where one of her accusers ended up being accused. And, this is what happens in these situations, that they take on a life that the dynamics, the momentum takes on a life of its own. And pretty soon, everyone who isn't pure enough at that moment ends up being accused. I mean, there isn't a big enough glass to hold the Schadenfreude for somebody like Kristi Noem, having to fight off the right wing. I mean, this is.
Well, conservative cancel culture is a very real thing. It's just ironic that now, finally, at long last, she's recognizing it. I don't know whether it's going to derail her, but this has been a big issue on Fox News and that alternative reality. And I mean, she was the darling up until 5 minutes ago, and now. It's sort of a reminder that in this day and age, if you're 99.9% pure, they're going to get you that's not enough. No, it's like you're going to drink the MAGA Kool-Aid. You got to drink every freaking drop of it. Okay. Speaking of which, Yeah, go on.
And what constitutes purity? And this, again, I'm going to splash this over both the right and the left. What constitutes purity changes every day.
Right. Yeah, because you have to keep upping the ante. It's like, it's like being a drug addict. You need a bigger and bigger dose. And well, of course, because you have to keep people on edge, on their toes. You have to keep them outraged. So you have to find new things to be outraged about. And after a while, you kind of run out of fuel of being outraged about the left. So you have to become outraged about people who are insufficiently outraged on the right. That actually made sense, believe it or not.
It does. And you're slicing the pie narrower and narrower and narrower to try to find your particular niche where you stand alone as the ultimate arbiter of, who should speak for the, Christian, decent, anti-trans bathroom, South Dakotan, Black Hills, yada, yada, yada movement, just as on the left, to keep adding letters to your person, to how you identify yourself, because again, you are staking out narrower and narrower claims of power against other people.
It's got to be very frustrating for Kristi Noem, though, because she's basically saying, her spokesman saying, look, do you see how many people we were willing to kill here in South Dakota to stay on the right side of MAGA? I mean, we didn't shut down anything. We have one of the worst death rates in the entire country. Okay, so do we get any credit for that? But, it's one thing to have lots of people in South Dakota die of the coronavirus because she won't shut something down. But if you might not get those Amazon jobs, now we're talking serious stuff.
Well, that's the other thing, isn't it? Once it's all fun and games until a whole bunch of jobs and money, and of course, the more paranoid fringes on the right are like, see, this is why, this is actually how conservatives become anti-capitalist. They're like, well, see, these giant capitalist organizations need to be smashed because they've become our new overlords and masters. And, again, the usual, the new. And I think this kind of heads to where we were going with this bizarre piece you were going to bring up. But, it's like, well, wasn't life just better when we were all, small farmers and shopkeepers?
Right.
Which, of course,
we go back to that.
Never really a time in modern history.
Yes, everything's been downhill since 1790 or whatever. Okay, so this is one of those I am old enough to remember stories. Okay, and I think you are too. I am old enough to remember when the Claremont Institute was really a mainstream, highly respected intellectual center of the conservative movement. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely.
They have evolved over the last several years into becoming not just MAGA, but now they're almost like, what is it, MAGA plus? And this goes to your point about how the revolution eats its own, because they started moving in that direction and they just haven't stopped. So the piece I wanted to talk to you about is in The American Mind, which is a publication of the Claremont Institute. And the headline is Why the Claremont Institute is Not Conservative, the word conservative in quotes, and you shouldn't be either. So it's kind of a repudiation of conservatism because conservatism is not right-wing enough. They want it to be revolutionary. And the only way that I can capture this is to read you the first three paragraphs, if you can bear with me here. And this is written by some guy named Glenn Elmers, who I don't know who he is, but he's speaking for the Institute now. Let's be blunt, he writes. The United States has become two nations occupying the same country. When pressed or in private, many would now agree. When pressed or in private, many admit as much. Few are willing to take the next step and accept that most people living in the United States today, certainly more than half, are not Americans in any meaningful sense of the term. Whoa, okay, see where we're going here? I don't just mean millions of illegal immigrants. Obvious those foreigners who have bypassed the regular process for entering the country and probably will never assimilate to our language and culture are politically as well as legally aliens. I'm really referring to the many native-born people, some of whose families have been here since the Mayflower, who may technically be citizens of the United States, but are no longer, if they ever were, Americans. They do not believe in, live by, or even like the principles, traditions, and ideas that until recently defined America as a nation and as a people. It is not obvious what we should call these citizen aliens, these non-American Americans, but they are something else. Okay, spoiler alert here. What he's talking about is that anybody that did not vote for Donald Trump is not really an American. And I'm not extrapolating or exaggerating. So this next paragraph. What about those who do consider themselves Americans? By and large, I'm referring to the 75 million people who voted in the last election against the senile figurehead of a party that stands for mob violence, ruthless censorship, and racial grievances, not to mention bureaucratic despotism. Regardless of Trump's obvious flaws, which he doesn't go into, preferring his reelection was not a difficult choice for these voters. In fact, leaving aside the Republican never-Trumpers and some squeamish centrists, it was not a difficult choice for either side. Both right and left know where they stand today, and it is not together, not anymore. So basically what he's saying is that the only real Americans are people who voted for Donald Trump. And if you did not vote for Donald Trump, if you voted for Joe Biden, then you are not in any real sense an American at all. So
Yeah,
Tom Nichols, there's a lot to unpack there. But what's interesting is that he goes on to say that, conservatism is dead. We need to be counter-revolutionary. The Constitution no longer works, and we need to go back to some sort of the ancient principles of America, which seems to be the agrarian thing. But what's happening here?
Well, there's just so much neurotic weirdness to unpack in this, and I'll add another piece to it, that another little snippet from there in a moment. One thing that's going on is this is now the heroic narrative, right? This is we are the last defenders of right and the Constitution as it was once understood. Because he says, well, these people are not Americans. And then in the next sentence says the Constitution no longer works. Well, fidelity to the Constitution and to the rule of law are really the only things that make us Americans. When you say, Charlie, you mentioned, he's going back to some ancient American idea. He's not even doing that. This is just blood and soil nonsense. This is, maybe I can lighten this moment and say, you remember Gregory Peck as Mengele in The Boys from Brazil?
Oh,
this very over the top, Bobby, your children will rule, I find this whole essay worked better if you read it in that voice, as Gregory Peck. And to give you an example, this is another paragraph. This was pulled out by our friend of the Bulwark, Christian Vanderbroek, who said, notice there's this one. If you, this is Elmer's writing. If you are a zombie or a human rodent who wants a shadow life of timid conformity, then put away this essay and go memorize the poetry of Amanda Gorman. Real men and women who love honor and beauty keep reading.
Man, rodents.
I mean, come on. Talk about sounding better in the original German.
Well, okay, so I struggle against going there, but that's exactly where I came. I finished reading that and I went, you know what? It's like the guy's saying, in private, we all realize that we have to be fascists, and let's stop screwing around with this whole Constitution, democracy, America stuff. It is the heroic, real Americans versus the fake Americans and the rodents. I mean, it's just the
zombies, the rodent humans,
this is fascist.
Too much. Yeah, I always, for a lot of reasons, including historical accuracy, I don't like the Nazi comparison. But this is blood and soil fascist nonsense, and but it's interesting, and I think we need to think about this for a moment because of what the Republicans or conservatives or whatever these guys call themselves now about why this is. When you had the rise of totalitarianism in the Soviet Union and Germany, it was in the wake of a gigantic military defeat, hyperinflation, massive dislocation between the people who had moved from the countries into the factories of the cities. I mean, you had this gigantic social and political and military dislocation that had happened. and people were unmoored and scared and angry. We're getting the same thing in America because why? Because this guy thinks Jake Tapper doesn't like him, because Hollywood and Netflix are too liberal, because the last president was half black before Trump. I mean, this is a fascist inclination. Like, I don't even want to call it fascism. It's to take a movie line from another movie, National Socialism was an ethos. These guys aren't even nearly coherent enough to be that kind of ideological fascist, but it's a kind of reactionary or reflexive fascism that basically is rooted in saying, I just don't like the culture because it doesn't love me enough.
Well, you're right. I kept reading to figure out, okay, so what are you proposing? What is your vision? So just stepping back from fascism here, clearly the rhetoric is the rhetoric of a civil war, which is that we're no longer one America. These people are not fellow Americans. We don't have anything in common. And the lament appears to be that yes, we are divided, but we're not divided enough. That we need to make this tribal divide much more.
Sorry to interrupt, but to say, and added to that, we are not American. We are not both Americans, and half of us are not even human beings.
Well, they're getting to that. And of course, and then this description of the Democrats. And by the way, I would love to spend a whole podcast talking about, where I disagree with the Democrats, the amount of money they're spending and everything. But this is interesting, the way that he describes it, is that the Democrats are a party that, quote, stands for mob violence, like January 6th never happened, mob violence,
projection,
ruthless censorship, and racial grievances, not to mention bureaucratic despotism. Well, you can, this again is, if you portray the other side as being this way, you're going to get to this. Now, we just called him a fascist, well, he is, but the Democratic Party, are they really for mob violence? I mean, this is, okay, January 6th was literally mob violence, ruthless censorship. Turn around, look at what all the things that the right wants to censor. Racial grievances. Now, by the way, have you noticed the degree to which conservatives are invested in denying any allegations of racism, racial prejudice, white nationalism? I mean, it is really extraordinary the degree to which they have internalized the anti-racist rhetoric. I mean, I think there are people who go too far. I think there are people who try to shove everything into the box of white supremacy. I was on a Sirius XM radio show yesterday, and we were talking about the need for voting reform with Dan Abrams, who has a great show. And a caller called in and basically said, you guys are missing the point, because you shouldn't talk about this without using the word racism in every sentence. And Abrams pushed back on him that, okay, look, we're talking about voting rights. We're talking about the civil rights movement, but you want us to use this term in every single context. And I understand that people push back, but from Tucker Carlson to other publications, the denial that there's any racial problem or any history that we have not solved of racial injustice, I mean, is really becoming aggressive. I can't remember the last time that the right became so overtly invested in saying there's no problem, look at you trying to make it a big deal about anti-Asian hate. It's like, this is your narrative. Well, wait, guys, these are real things. Right?
Yeah, but this is, again, it's the bunker mentality of, if we give an inch on racism, well, there's two things going on. One is if we give an inch on racism, then we have to admit that we are increasingly a minority in this country. Physically, we older white males that make up the bulk of this movement, but also that we are a political minority and probably ought to be. Because of our dedication to minority rule. I mean, we've used fascist. I mean, let's bring in the other word. This is almost like an apartheid approach to politics, to say we don't. Our goal is to make sure that enough states are governed by minority vote in enough times to control the Electoral College and the Senate. But the other thing that's going on, and this is where I think we do have to talk about the left for a minute, is to say, this is also a reaction to a left that has become monomaniacal, as you point out, about race being about everything. And I'll give you a small example on it. I was we were talking about this Van Halen versus Van Hagar debate that I wandered into, because there is no stupid music debate that I won't make worse by saying something. And I said something about, well, the old Van Halen was very MTV friendly. That's why, the people who like that incarnation. Right. And someone popped into my timeline to say, and what a racist network it was. And I thought, it's okay for 10 minutes a day for something to not be about a kind of demonstrative or performative denunciation of racism. And I think the whacked out right and the monomaniacal left have become symbiotic on this question. I think, decent and intelligent people understand there is a serious race problem in the United States, and it is seriously manifested in the way Republicans are trying to hijack voting to suppress and eliminate votes from people of color. But to make everything about race and then to encourage, I won't even say encourage, then to create the space for these guys, for the Tucker Carlsons of the world, to say nothing is about race, creates a nice, easy black-white, let's say red-blue, team A, team B dichotomy where you simply cannot ever admit any nuance or any space for negotiation or discussion, because then you're consorting with the enemy. And this plays especially well into this MAGA right, which is we are the oppressed, we are the new oppressed. These guys believe, and it's insane, but it's also projection.
Yeah, I mean, this has become, you're right, both of those things is insane, and it is projection. I mean, the playing of a victim card by the right has become so common that it's almost like the air that we breathe. But you go back to the 1992, I actually wrote a book called A Nation of Victims. And if you would have said then, American conservatives are going to decide that they want to be the victims and play the victim card all the time, I would have thought, really, seriously?
I remember that book, and I remember thinking, part of the reason that I was so attracted, in the 80s to American conservatism is we were not the party of, constant victimhood and moral equivocation and, special pleading and all of the other things that, we had different problems in the 80s. Perhaps we were I always say that I think the biggest mistake is that, again, something you would never believe about today's Republican Party, but that we were all head and no heart.
I have that
we were overly intellectualized about, the poor suffering. Well, that just happens.
Well, you're right.
Let's look at economic models.
It was a little bit harsh. So there was one little element in that book that's kind of a weird story. Should I even tell it? Okay, one little element where I was citing that everybody in America could claim they're a victim, everyone, including Clarence Thomas, who had just been confirmed to the Supreme Court when he had said, "I am the victim of a high-tech lynching." And so, it was very powerful to see somebody on the right playing the victim card in that particular way. So I did, that was an early indication that conservatives might be willing to play the victim card. The reason it's a weird story is that one day I'm sitting at home after this book comes out, and I get a call, saying Justice Thomas is on the line, and he called and he'd read the book and he wanted to say that he liked the book, and I was like going, do you remember that I actually called you out for playing the victim card? But I was young and much more cowardly then, so I didn't do it. So you have a book coming out this summer, Our Own Worst Enemy. So speaking of pets, obviously you want to hold some of your fire, but this is about the internal attack on democracy. Is that right? I mean, it
is, and around the world and in the United States, yes, that we have become the source of democratic decline, because for years you could get a lot of people on the right and left say, yeah, democracy. We had a big wave of democracy in the early 90s, and now it seems to be receding. And the answers were always, well, it's because of globalization and economic anxiety, and it's because of, the culture changing so fast and multiculturalism and I think in fact, I was actually blocked on the book for a while because I was trying to test all of those theories and searching for evidence that would actually make sense. And what I came to is 30 years of prosperity, no matter what. And of course, people bristle at that because they say, we're not a prosperous nation. We have a lot of income inequality, but inequality is not the same thing as poverty. It just means that there's a gap between rich and poor. But it does not mean we are a destitute nation. We have had 30 years of peace, whether we want to call it that or not. We have outsourced imperial policing to a small army of volunteers. The average person lives their life without foreign affairs or military security impinging on them in any way, as it did in the 60s or 70s, to take one example. And we live with an incredibly high sense of entitlement created by technological prowess. And I think in the end, we've become this kind of pampered, entitled, unserious culture that, leads to the kind of things that we're talking about today, Charlie, where, someone says, well, CNN or MSNBC has a bunch of hosts that don't like me. Therefore, I am oppressed. I am oppressed because, my guy doesn't win every election. I am oppressed because, there's too many Black females playing police captains on TV. The level for considering whether you are oppressed has become so low merely to mean I am annoyed or inconvenienced, that we are really tearing apart democracy. I mean, we and it's not just here in the United States. I mean, the rapidity with which people will say, well, democracy has failed, right? That the system has failed, in a world where the system, works remarkably well. I think where multiple systems work remarkably well, has become remarkable. And, the book's not about Trump. I mean, Trump, right. Just like with the death of expertise, where, it's like somebody said to me, oh, you must have known that the stupidest president ever was coming. And I said, it wasn't about him. And this book isn't about him. This was about knowing that something like him could happen, something like him, like Boris Johnson, like Narendra Modi, like Jair Bolsonaro. These things are happening, and we're inflicting them on ourselves. I guess the tagline, is, who keeps electing these terrible people? Ask the voters.
So are we a decadent empire?
I don't think we're an empire, but we are a decadent culture. And I think and I mean, again, post-industrial Western or Westernized cultures have become decadent, because we are entitled and we expect. I mean, the American. I went and looked up a couple of weird things when I was doing this book. The average American home has 2.3 televisions in it. The average American home, not like rich people. And I kept trying to juxtapose this against what would you have considered rich in 1970? Somebody who has a TV in their bedroom. Remember when that became a thing? Like, oh, hey, they've got another TV that in their bedroom. Like they have 2 color TVs. That was a huge deal.
Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah.
They have air conditioning. Huge deal. Now most Americans are like, who lives without air conditioning? This is madness. They have a late model car,
which is smarter than the average teenager.
Yeah. Safer, smarter.
These are amazing cars. I mean, these are amazing. Okay, so I have to ask you this, Tom. I mean, this may seem to be trite, but why are our phones getting so much smarter and we are getting so much dumber?
Well, but that's why, because we are outsourcing thinking to apps, and we're happy to do it. Why? I mean, this is the old. Now I'm going to sound like an old guy. I finally had to memorize my wife's phone number because I never call it. Right?
I know this. No,
right? You tap the phone and say, "Wife," and beloved, and it dials.
Back in the day, we had to remember our combinations, our locker combinations. Otherwise, you never get your shit. Right?
I mean, well, opening my computer with my thumbprint, or opening my phone with my face. you know, are, I mean, these are conveniences that actually make us in some way less mentally agile. But I also think, and this links back to something I wrote about in Death of Expertise that I come back to in Our Own Worst Enemy. We treat information and political information like a giant luau or buffet. We don't eat balanced meals. We sort of walk around and we graze all the junk food, and then say, how is it that I am, fat and diabetic and hyperglycemic when all I've been eating are chicken fingers and ice cream?
That's good. Yeah.
And the same problem is happening to us politically. I mean, talk to people. This goes back to what you were saying about Sidney Powell. Talk to people who say, well, I really understand. I understand the voting fraud problem. I am in the know. I am one of the initiate, when in fact, you're an idiot. You don't know anything about this stuff. The same people who think they have mastered the voting fraud problem don't even understand. I had this argument with a friend of mine who's a pretty intelligent guy, but he was like, well, a lot of statistical irregularities. And I said, you're an intelligent person. You understand that when Pennsylvania passes a law that says that the day of votes have to be counted first, it's going to create the perception of a blue shift later in the day. And that was the point. You understand that, right? And his answer was, well, Tom, I've read stuff.
Yeah, I've done my research.
You can't argue with that. You just can't argue with it.
Or the people who think, well, that's your truth. I have my own truth. It is interesting. I hesitate to recommend this. I do recommend it, actually. The Next Level podcast that we have at the Bulwark Plus. It's behind the paywall, but yesterday's was extremely depressing. I have to say, Sarah Longwell was talking about a focus group that she had done down in Georgia, and it's enough to make you stroke out, or at least get much stronger alcohol. And one of my takeaways was this process is the process by which people see entertainment and news and politics as entertainment has really accelerated. That a lot of the people, are not outraged, do not take it seriously, because it's all a big show for them. It's just sort of like their channel, surfing through various forms of entertainment. And there's Donald Trump, and he's like, well, what's going to happen next in this? And this is pretty amazing. So, while we're thinking that people ought to be absolutely horrified by the attempt to overthrow the government, that's just one more episode in the Trump show. The other point she made,
that's the nature of decadence, Charlie. That, when you are an unserious culture where you don't sit down and read the news and say, now what does the tax bill say? What does immigration policy say? What is my tax rate? How, where do we stand on, relations with our enemies in the world? And are we safe? And instead it becomes, is today the day that the cool guy with the trident and the funky helmet is going to be in the Coliseum? Because I'm definitely going to tune in for that.
Because you don't know what's going to happen. The other point she made, because I want to be fair to this, is the implications for American politics of the death of local media. That everything is nationalized. So, for example, she's talking to people in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, and they pretty much don't know anything that's going on with her. They don't know. They don't cover, because the local media either doesn't exist or doesn't pay any attention. So all they know are the national narratives, and it's really not about substance. A lot of these people go, yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene, when you tell them about some outrageous thing she's said about, Jewish space lasers, they go, yeah, that's pretty bad. But ultimately they go, yeah, I kind of like the fact that she speaks her mind, or that she's feisty, or that, she has ads where she has an AR-15 because that shows that she fights or whatever. And you go, that's where JVL is now proposing that rather than having elections, that we just get, put people's, the faces of the candidates up on the wall, and then get 100 capuchin monkeys and give them all, cute monkeys, and give them all darts and have them throw at the picture, because how would that be worse than what we have now? And and so whatever picture has the most monkey darts in, that person is elected. And he basically says, in what way is that not an improvement, or at least equivalent to what we have now?
But we have to add something to this, and this goes back to the decadence problem, which is, when it's true, this collapse of local news, and the collapse of having like a trusted local newsman who says, I'm sad to have to tell you what, Marjorie Taylor Greene did here today,
Right.
folks, as one of your neighbors. But the other thing that's going on is when you tell people this stuff and they say, yeah, but I really like she speaks her mind. What they mean is, I am basically unhappy. And this is something I talk about in the book. I'm basically unhappy. My life has not been fulfilled in the way I think I deserve. My sense of entitlement about the kind of exciting, interesting life I think I should have had has not panned out. So I'm going to vote for this person who not only makes life interesting and exciting, but she's pissing off other people to match the inherent sense of resentment I have. And now we're all miserable. And that makes me happy. I mean, there's really a deeper issue here about resentment, about people. If you look at the people that went to the Capitol on January 6th, these are all people who are not, they're not bad off. This wasn't some revolt of the poor and the dispossessed and the voiceless. These were middle-class white people, basically saying my life didn't turn out to be as interesting as I wanted it to be. I was supposed to be a life coach and an actor and, and a military hero and the star of my own action movie in my head. And none of that stuff turned out. So I'm going to go to the Capitol. I'm going to make everybody miserable. And that has become the driving force in democratic politics.
On the flip side, though, if you have been told and you sincerely believe that the other side hates America, is destroying every single thing that we value, that they in fact are the other, that they have stolen the election, and you think of yourself as somebody who loves America and who wants to protect your family, you can understand how those people would become radicalized, and they have been fed a steady diet of all of this. If you believe that half of America are no longer really Americans, then you're going to act it out in a way that you wouldn't have, say, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, but I'm going to push back on this, Charlie,
Sure.
and say that they are primed to believe it because they have this kind of itching sense of inferiority and resentment, and they were ready for that message. This, Fox and Tucker and the rest of them didn't take decent, ordinary Americans and turn them into lunatics. These were people that were waiting for someone to tell them that it's okay to feel the way that they feel. And the other problem, and this goes back to the kind of culture we are, is how utterly unserious they were. The people who said, I'm going to storm the Capitol. I talked about this in a piece in the Atlantic about a month ago, where the realtor who took the private jet, right?
Yeah,
she's like,
I love it.
This is it, life or death, life or death. And by the way, when I get back to Texas, remember, I can sell the hell out of your house. Remember me, I'm your rich. And I'm like, who the hell says I'm storming the Capitol, life or death? This is all the marbles. And then holds basically the equivalent of holding up your business card saying, and remember, I can sell your house. These are people who, we live in a culture of zero consequences. People are going in front of federal judges facing prison terms for sedition and saying, but I have a work-related retreat in Mexico I need to go to, Your Honor. So can I get a few weeks? I mean, I'm sorry, but this is not, somehow that these people have come to believe that America is being destroyed. These are people who want to believe America is being destroyed because America never loved them as much as they think it should have loved them, and it hasn't given them what they think they're entitled to.
I wonder if there's a connection here to the popularity of post-apocalyptic movies, the number of movies that we have where we, as a form of entertainment, imagine the world has been destroyed by either global climate change or nuclear weapons or a massive pandemic, and we have to start over. We have to survive and then start over again. It's become this kind of weird, late stage civilization fantasy. What if everything was wiped out and we had to start over again? I kind of wonder whether there's some connection to this, that we live in the most interesting possible time, and yet people are so bored and kind of want to.
I think it also explains. I mean, that you're singing my song because I actually teach a course on this kind of apocalyptic pop culture stuff, and of course it peaks during the late Cold War, right? When we assume that nuclear war is around the corner. What you get afterwards is zombie or pandemic driven narratives, even before the pandemic, that wipe everything out. But the other form of movie that we should be looking at here is the obsession with comic books and superheroes.
Oh, we're going to talk about the Snyder Cut. We're going to get to it.
No. I haven't seen it. So, but I think it's just interesting that a culture of adult, and I love, by the way, I mean, I still watch the original Christopher Reeve Superman as comfort food. But we've become a culture that is so juvenile and so bored and so obsessed with the notion of heroism that we are middle-aged people, and I think anybody over 35 is all pretty much middle-aged, but we are grown men and women who flock to the theaters to see superheroes, to watch glorified versions of comic books, because again, I think we all believe that we are the heroes of our own movie. And that's why that's the kind of thinking that ends up having you running into the Senate, thumping painting your face and thumping your chest and pretending that you're Mel Gibson in Braveheart.
Well, we can all have our own themes, playing in our head, the music, at least we can't have our own laugh tracks, but we can have our own themes. Yeah, no, you're right. We all have to create our own dramas, and you can do that so easily. That's the thing, that there are so many.
We are a nation of drama queens. We really have become obsessed with drama.
Well, and so what a shock that we end up with one of the ultimate drama queens as the temporary president of the United States last time. So next time we'll have you on. I want to talk about what's going on in Washington. Because I got to tell you, I have this. If a pollster called me today and said, "Do you approve or disapprove of Joe Biden?" I would say I approve. I really think that he's moving quickly, and I'm still basking in the glow of the contrast, with his decency versus the malignancy of Donald Trump. But I do have this creeping concern: at what point are we going to see some of this bipartisan moderation? Is there some moment at which moderates, the centrists, who I think played a significant role in this election, where the centrists are, I don't know, thrown a bone? Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, this is I'm not trying to be critical here, but no, I'm getting the tenor. I'm getting that whole, if not now, then when vibe. We need to move as hard to the left, as aggressively as possible, without any compromise on issue after issue. And that many people in the Democratic Party believe that this is the moment for them to enact the Bernie Sanders agenda. And I kind of feel like, hey, those of us that were centrists, that really wanted to get rid of Trumpism, we're happy that happened. But I mean, we're still here, and there is a gap, isn't there, between Biden's rhetoric about this and some of the things we're actually seeing him do?
Yeah, and I think that there's a gap here between policy and messaging as well. One is on policy, elections have consequences. I actually said this when Obama was president. When people say he's moving, I said, look, if you want your own Supreme Court justices, well, then you have to win elections. I mean, that you know that over the years, my mantra is this is bad politics, but it is within the powers of the elected president or the congressional majority. As long as it's done according to the Constitution, there's only so much whining you can do about it. And so I expect Joe Biden to govern like a Democrat. The Democrats won the election fair and square. They control both houses. They're going to pass things that you and I don't like. And I think added to that, there is the problem that the Republicans have said, we're not going to compromise on anything. I mean, McConnell and the rest of them have basically said, sure, we dare you to reach out and be bipartisan so that we can pants you in front of your own voters again and make you look like idiots again. So to have a bipartisan compromise, you have to have a functional Republican Party. But the messaging problem, this is where I come over to agreeing with you. The thing that infuriates me about Democrats as political strategists is that they think that every election is the last election. Mm-hmm. They think, hey, we won the Senate. You guys are one senator. You guys are one case of COVID or the flu or pneumonia away from Majority Leader Mitch McConnell again. And when you're out there saying, as you pointed out, everything's about race and we have to enact the Bernie Sanders agenda and socialism isn't so bad, they're not listening to people like David Shore, who I think is
Yeah.
really intelligent about this, who says all elections are national elections, and that what AOC says in her D plus 55 district can in fact hurt Abigail Spanberger in her R plus 2 district or whatever it is. That the Democrats, being Democrats, have zero message discipline, do not understand how small a minority the left in America really is, and keep blowing up the chance for moving toward bipartisanship because they somehow think that the repudiation of Donald Trump was consequently an affirmation of the far left agenda of a minority of the Democratic Party. And that's, Biden, I think, I too would say that I approve of him because I think he's actually navigating among three parties here, which is this completely obstructionist Republican Party, a more or less sensible Democratic Party, and a kind of, left-wing Democratic Party that just has no political maturity and doesn't understand that they could all end up being in the minority in another 18 months again. And I'm not sure what he can do about that.
I'm not sure what he can do about it. We'll find out how he handles himself, what kind of discipline we get from Joe Biden at the press conference. I snarked at the beginning that we know what Ben Shapiro is going to say about it. My impression of Biden is that he always that they lower the bar, say he's going to come out, he's going to be completely senile and incoherent, and he comes out and he's just fine. But in the current media environment, all the Ben Shapiros of the world needs are 10 seconds of video that you can take out of context. And you're going to get the 10 seconds, like that stupid thing yesterday where he turns to one of his aides and says, who do we turn it over to next? And somebody says, well, the reporters have to leave. There was nothing unusual about that at all.
That was a completely, for anyone who has worked in Washington for more than 30 seconds, that was the completely normal end to a meeting.
And yet on conservative media today, it's like, see, they were protecting him because he was becoming senile. He didn't know what he was talking about. And, this is part of the problem of moderation, centrist, bipartisanship, any of the things we've been talking about is that when you have one side that refuses to engage in any sort of good faith debate, when none of it is going to be in good faith, how do you find a way to work past that? And I don't know the answer for that.
This is why I don't argue about policy with my former comrades on the right, because none of it's a good faith discussion.
No, it is no longer good. It's just the policy stuff is just the wallpaper for something completely different and a lot darker
and vile. Something underlying it that is vile. Exactly.
Tom Nichols, thank you so much for coming on and setting me straight on the Hero Cat story, which I put.
Well, Charlie, if there's going to be bipartisan unity, it's going to start with cat and dog people, and we can do this. But you got to lay off Sarah Longwell, man. You're inundating her with dog pictures, and you're calling in the dog mobs on her, and I gotta speak up for Sarah. Think positive thoughts about cats, and we'll reach across the aisle.
This is a new definition of victimization. So I tweet dog pictures and tag her. Poor Sarah. Sarah Longwell is the Amazon of American politics. And you're saying I need to lay off Sarah Longwell because on her Twitter stream, a picture of a puppy might show up.
And it is true. It's so true that anybody who knows Sarah knows how funny that really is to say that you have to lay off Sarah Longwell. So, she can defend herself. But,
yes,
like I said, we will find pet unity before we get to political unity in this country.
We may. Tom Nichols, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it very much. And thank you all for listening to today's Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We will be back tomorrow, and we'll do this all over again.